Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Joe Brennan, the Director of Government Affairs here at the Delaware Association of Realtors, and I'm proud to present our legislative wrap-up for the 153rd General Assembly. Before I begin, let me extend a sincere thank you to those who made this work possible. Sincerely, specifically, Maggie Haas, our Public Policy Chair, Chris Allen, our vice chair, and every one of the 21 current DAR Public Policy Committee members. Your time, your insights, and your passion fueled one of the most impactful years of legislative advocacy yet. You were the strategy behind the success. Our members testified multiple times on various pieces of legislation. They read hundreds of pages included in the agenda packets for our meetings. We have the best group of industry professionals from different backgrounds that make us a stronger advocacy group. We sent over 25 letters to members of the General Assembly that gave our positions of support or voiced industry-based concerns regarding each individual piece of legislation. We discussed and tracked over 45 bills during this legislative season. There were even we were even able to get one bipartisan resolution passed by both chambers that highlighted the importance of making the dream of home ownership in Delaware a reality for future generations. Also, we want to thank our other committees who serve valiantly and help us situate ourselves even more profoundly with our General Assembly. As we begin looking back on this session, let's start with a simple truth. Delaware, much like we recognized last year, is in the middle of a housing crisis. Availability is down, affordability is eroding, and the dream of home ownership is slipping further out of reach for too many Delawareans. The one main difference this year is that we have a clearer vision based on the work of our association and the fellow stakeholders that participated in the Affordable Housing Production Task Force, which finalized its report earlier this year. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So based on our guiding principles, we look to, as far as our role in the Delaware General Assembly and our advocacy, we're facing a crisis in a housing availability and affordability. Our mission is to expand access to home ownership and to protect private property rights. Again, as always, provide expert service and education to the public, promote fair housing, and defend the market. As I said before, we have the availability of the Affordable Housing Production Task Force and the information that we have. So what did we gain from this? In April of 2025, the Affordable Housing Production Task Force produced a report that highlights major gaps in housing. We understand now we have a lack of coordination in how we fund and plan for housing. As you can see there, about 50% of renters are cost burdened, with roughly 25,000 severely cost burdened, which is over 50% of their income. And so this puts mounting pressure on both renters and buyers. Importantly, the task force issued recommendations that will directly shape the housing legislation we expect to see in 2026 and beyond. Those include new financing tools, land use reforms, targeted support for workforce and affordable housing. It's a roadmap and will be part of how Delaware follows it. So let's go over some key pieces of legislation. Starting with our 1% for Housing campaign, which had an impact on the state budget, operating budget for this year. This year, thanks to DAR's focused advocacy, Delaware increased its housing development fund by $15 million, with a $14 million in appropriated special funds, $4 million from the general fund. This marks the first time in decades we've broken from the flat $4 million status quo. We also saw increases in funding for workforce housing and downtown development district program, helping communities grow and attract private investment. We joined the Delaware Affordable Housing Coalition, Housing Alliance Delaware, and Home Builders Association of Delaware in this campaign for the 1% for Housing campaign that was strategic and data driven. And it worked because we tied it directly to the needs identified by the Affordable Housing Production Task Force. We made the case and the legislature listened. One of our bigger issues that we continue to work on is the realty transfer tax reform. This year, we attempted a different strategy. DAR championed 3 separate bills aimed at strategically reducing the realty transfer tax to make home ownership more accessible and to better support the residents who are the backbone of our communities. Here's kind of what we focused on. One, we introduced a bill to reduce the transfer tax for Delawareans moving within the state, helping longtime residents who are downsizing, relocating for work, or trying to stay rooted in their community. It's a common sense way to encourage mobility without punishing loyalty to the state. The second bill was in support for middle class buyers. This proposed reducing the transfer tax on transactions under $1 million, directly benefiting moderate income working families. In today's market, even modest homes are crossing high price thresholds. This targeted tax relief provides real help to the middle class. The third was an incentive for first-time homebuyers and rental ownership. The third measure created a reduction for first-time homebuyers purchasing rental properties with the goal of encouraging investment and expanding the pool of responsible small landlords, especially among veterans, first responders, and workforce housing participants. Together, these transfer tax reforms are designed to improve housing affordability, support workforce recruitment, and honor public service through meaningful incentives. While these bills did not cross the finish line this session, they laid critical groundwork. We have strong legislative interest and bipartisan engagement, and we'll be pushing these forward as a major 2026 priority. Let's look at last year's budget compared to this year's. So fiscal year 25 focused mainly on one-time $10 million capital allocation for housing with little clarity on where or how it would be used. This year, it's a transformation. We saw our 1% for housing campaign combined with recommendations from the Affordable Housing Task Force directly lead to new and sustained investment in housing production across the board. That's not just a win, that is a paradigm shift. Some bigger bills that we had to focus on. House Bill 70, which was amended multiple times, mostly because of the activity and the advocacy of our stakeholders and our members. This was Delaware's lead paint remediation bill. This bill passed, but not without significant changes that DAR helped shape. Our committee members went to work on this bill and directly impacted the outcome. If you want to see how impactful your voice is in the industry, this was the bill for this year. We worked alongside stakeholders from across the aisle to make sure the bill reduced the financial burden on landlords, many of whom operate on razor-thin margins. Thanks to our advocacy, multiple drafts were revised, cost-shifting provisions were amended, and a task force was created to oversee implementation, one we intend to have a seat on moving forward. The advocacy effort on the part of our members is worth emphasizing. The markup process was a victory in and of itself. Each iteration of the bill reflected our input. We helped scale back burdensome requirements and shaped language that protects our members while ensuring children are safe. And we'll continue our work, especially in securing representation on the task force created by this bill. This bill resulted in giving us the opportunity to bring this program back before the legislature to finalize any implementation practices. SB 115, this dealt with expungement records for evictions. This was another win, which was much more targeted, but no less important. For example, SB 115 reformed the rules around the expungement of eviction records by lowering the minimum to 5 years from their previous standard of 7 years. This was a result of continued dialogue with the sponsors, where we made sure any reform preserved fairness and did not punish housing providers for legitimate actions. These are the kinds of bills where we may not agree on every word, but through constructive engagement, we secure results that protect our members and support Delaware's renters. Another notable development this session was the passage of Senate Joint Resolution 8, a poignant shift in the relationship between the state and local governments when it comes to zoning and land use decisions. This bill signals a new level of state interest in how local zoning impacts housing supply and affordability. What does it do? It directs the Office of State Planning and Coordination to evaluate local zoning practices and make recommendations to improve consistency and support statewide housing goals. It highlights the disconnect between local zoning restrictions and the state's efforts to increase housing production. It begins a formal process of reviewing how zoning decisions affect statewide development priorities. Why does this matter? This resolution marks a delicate but deliberate step towards state-level engagement in local zoning authority. While it doesn't mandate zoning changes yet, it opens the door for future proposals that could include incentives for local governments, accountability mechanisms for restrictive land use policies, or even potential state-level zoning interventions in high-need areas. House Concurrent Resolution 74, which created a task force to explore a Delaware Department of Housing. A particularly impactful resolution passed this session, and one that could reshape how Delaware approaches housing for decades to come, in House Concurrent Resolution 74. This resolution formally establishes a bipartisan task force charged with exploring the creation of a standalone Department of Housing in Delaware. Some of the key details: this task force will be co-chaired by senior legislators and will include key state agency leaders, signaling a strong commitment from both the executive and legislative branches. The group is expected to hold its first meeting by September 19th of this year and a final report due by April 9th of next year. This effort represents a serious structural shift towards centralized cabinet-level governance of housing policy in Delaware. If formed, this Department of Housing could streamline housing programs, improve coordination across state agencies, and potentially accelerate affordable housing development by reducing bureaucratic friction. We're watching this and the progress of this and the results of the task force closely. The structure, the scope, and the authority of any new department will have direct impacts on development, permitting, funding access, and long-term housing policy. This is the beginning of a high-level policy conversation, and we intend to be at the table every step of the way. We should also celebrate what didn't happen this year. There was no introduction of a statewide rent control legislation this session, as opposed to, in contrast, what happened last year. In Wilmington, however, there was a rent stabilization ordinance that was introduced and narrowly failed. At the state level, the sponsor of last year's rent control bill did not reintroduce it, a direct result of our campaign and lack of legislative support. So DAR launched a phased advocacy campaign, and we only needed phase 1 to stop this misguided effort. But the threat isn't gone. We must remain vigilant, especially in Wilmington, where rent control advocates are still very active. So, new proposed legislation. One of the most exciting pieces of legislation introduced this year, and one that DAR is proud to support, is the First-Time Home Buyers Savings Account Bill, sponsored by Senator Huxtable, which establishes the housing opportunities using savings and earnings plan, or simply the house plan. This forward-thinking bill creates a first-time home buyer savings account program to help Delaware residents prepare for home ownership and with real tax incentives and flexible uses. What does it do? It allows individuals to open a tax-deductible savings account specifically for eligible home purchases and costs like down payments, closing costs, or even rental deposits. encouraging long-term financial planning by letting account holders name a beneficiary, even themselves. And it enables tax-free growth of these funds and up to $50,000 in total contributions over a 10-year period. This bill supports young families, first-generation buyers, and Delawareans without generational wealth. It provides no-cost, high-impact support for home ownership, all without requiring direct state spending. It strengthens communities, it boosts market stability, and encourages renters to transition into homeowners and long-term residents. There are safeguards built into it. There are limitations to prevent abuse, such as penalties for early or ineligible withdrawals and clear reporting requirements to ensure accountability. The truth is, with this House plan, Delaware joins a growing number of states using smart tax policy to expand access to home ownership. This bill will be a priority for us heading into 2026, and we're already working with lawmakers, financial institutions, and stakeholders to refine and build support. This is a practical, market-friendly solution to one of our biggest challenges, and it's the kind of innovation that reflects DAR's values and vision. Another significant win for property rights and homeowner protection came not from the legislature, but the direct engagement with state regulators. Following ongoing conversations between DAR and the Delaware Department of Insurance, new official guidance has been issued regarding the use of drone technology by insurance companies. The concern was insurers have increasingly used unmanned aircraft systems or drones to inspect properties, especially rooftops, and in some cases have based policy cancellations or non-renewals solely on drone captured images showing minor or cosmetic damage. So this new guidance changes that. Insurers can no longer rely solely on drone imagery of cosmetic damage or to cancel or refuse to renew a policy. They must present concrete evidence of substantial or material degradation before taking adverse action. And importantly, all such actions must fully comply with the Delaware Insurance Code, including property notice, a clear and specific explanation for any action, and any transparency when aerial imagery is part of their assessment. This is a big step forward in protecting homeowners from unfair or automated decisions. And we thank Insurance Commissioner Trinidad Navarro and the Department of Insurance for working with us to ensure that drone innovation doesn't come at the expense of homeowner fairness. One of the best meetings we had this year, we actually were fortunate enough to meet with our Delaware State Housing Authority Director, Matt Heckles. It was one of the highlights for us this year, and it didn't come in the form of a bill or a budget line. It was a conversation. The Delaware Association of Realtors was proud to host Director Heckles, the newly appointed director of the Delaware State Housing Authority, for a special policy roundtable at our office with our Public Policy Committee and Realtor leaders. This was more than a meet and greet. It was a deep dive into DSHA's strategy to expand housing supply, ongoing efforts to improve affordability and access to capital, and a shared vision for how public-private partnerships can drive sustainable statewide housing solutions. Our realtor leaders shared real-world insights on market conditions, permitting delays, financing challenges, and the barriers home buyers and housing providers face every day. The result? It's a strong foundation for collaboration. Director Heckles was not only receptive, he was committed to engaging our industry in DSHA's long-term planning with shared legislative priorities, marked by our collective involvement in the Affordable Housing Production Task Force's report and recommendations. As many of you know, our CEO, Wes Stefanik, was very much involved in that and a member of that task force, and provided great feedback and provided a lot of industry-related information to pass on to the task force. This meeting marked the beginning of what we believe will be a productive, lasting partnership to bring practical, informed solutions to the forefront of Delaware housing policy. So as we look ahead into 2026, here's what we can expect and how we're preparing. We expect a rent escrow bill will return, but this time with a familiar sponsor, whom we've worked with in the past and have developed a productive relationship. Representative Josue Ortega, who represents District 3 in the House, Delaware House, uh, came to us and initiated a conversation and is looking for language to develop something that's balanced for our industry going forward. Rent control, the truth is, may surface again, especially at the municipal level, but we have multiple tools in our arsenal to head off those policy discussions as we did this year. Our campaign against rent stabilization was integral in that effort. A controversial attempt to reclassify Delaware wetlands is expected, one that would have zoning and housing development impacts, but this has been in the pipeline for years. There's been much back and forth between our group and Senator Stephanie Hansen, who is looking at sponsoring this year's legislation coming up, and those discussions continue. The legislature is also eyeing more rezoning incentives for local municipalities. This is a positive step compared to statewide mandates, which there were failed attempts during this legislative season to do that. The truth is, we've laid the groundwork to update the landlord-tenant guide. We had great amount of support from our unexpected allies, giving us the confidence this update will pass this year. We've been working with a similar bill sponsor from previous years who is looking at getting a fresh start with this bill coming up in 2026. We will continue to work with Senator Huxtable on first-time homebuyer savings account bill that I talked about earlier, among other pivotal recommendations from the Affordable Housing Production Task Force. And finally, as you will hear from in a little bit from Andy, who's going to join us, we have a strong wholesaling reform bill that was introduced late in the session. It will carry over and be a priority for us in the coming year. The bottom line is that we will be very busy talking with our legislative partners in both chambers to set up our legislative package for 2026. This is going to be very much a very heavy scheduled off-season for us outside of the legislative calendar. This is something I'm looking forward to as the government affairs director and already looking at setting up meetings to talk with various legislators as the dust has continued to settle on this legislative season. So with that, I will entertain do we have any questions in our chat? I'll stop that, dude. I didn't see any questions. I know there's some pieces of legislation. As I said, we covered various pieces of legislation in our public policy committee. We opined on over 25 of them, some various different amendments that were made because of the efforts of our advocacy group, but wanted to give you a sense of where we are at. So if there's any questions, I will gladly entertain those. If not, I will hand it over to Andy. And there he is. All right. Take it away, Andy.
Thank you very much, Joe. Fantastic summary there of the session and great work on your behalf and DAR. So my pleasure to be with you here today, folks, to share some information about several topics that impact us all here in the real estate world, which, as we all know, just seems to change more rapidly all the time. And so we work hard trying to keep up with everything. So let me review some matters with you. And Joe mentioned about the wholesaling bill. So Senator Manzavinos had asked DAR last year to take a look at the topic of wholesaling and to study it and bring forward a draft of a bill that we thought would make sense for Delaware. So DAR had a committee work on this quite extensively, looking at materials from other states, debated things back and forth as to what we thought would make sense for Delaware, and ultimately came to following an approach similar to what Pennsylvania just enacted. And that is that a wholesaling transaction the wholesaler would need to be a real estate licensee, and the wholesaler would provide the property owner with a disclosure form from the Delaware Real Estate Commission, a yet to be developed form, that would advise that property owner that they were contemplating entering into a wholesaling transaction where the wholesaler would be seeking to assign the contract to an ultimate buyer, and that the wholesaler would, of course, be making an assignment fee on that. The law, if enacted, and the disclosure form would advise that property owner that they would have the right to rescind that first leg, I'll call it, of the wholesaling transaction for a number of days. And that if they did not rescind during that time period, then the wholesaler would proceed forward with trying to find an ultimate buyer for the property. There would not be any additional disclosure on the second leg of the wholesale transaction. There would not be any additional right to rescind. So that's similar to the approach that Pennsylvania has just put in place. As part of the same bill, with it being a consumer protection type bill, the senator agreed to put in some updates to the real estate guarantee fund, part of the licensing act in Delaware. And so this would allow for compensation of up to $50,000 in connection with any one transaction or claim, regardless of the number of persons or parcels involved in that one transaction. That would be an increase from the current $25,000 level to $50,000 level. Additionally, it would make clear that the real estate guarantee fund money could be used for compensation to a member of the public who was harmed by an owner of a brokerage organization who does not hold a license but did engage in real estate services or was involved with the real estate transaction that caused harm to that member of the public. Additionally, the changes to the guarantee fund would loosen it up a little bit as far as the discretion that the commissioners would have for awarding funds from the guarantee fund. And the current language is that the aggrieved person has fully pursued and exhausted all available remedies and taken reasonable steps to collect the commission collect the money from a judgment that they had against a licensee who had done them wrong. The need for this change came about, quite frankly, by a provision where there was a claim presented to the Real Estate Commission. They had their usual hearing as part of this, and the member of the public was represented by a lawyer who's unfortunately since deceased, and that lawyer did an excellent job, and uh, he was almost trying too hard, quite frankly. He let it be known to the commissioners that there was one more avenue he might be able to possibly file to in order to try to collect money to collect on the judgment that they had against the person who had done them wrong. And on that basis, the commissioners felt, well, that person had not really fully exhausted absolutely all of the possible remedies that they might have. So they then did not award compensation to that person, even though the commissioners, wanted to. So this change would make things a little more flexible for the commission, would say that the aggrieved person has diligently pursued and exhausted all reasonable remedies and taken reasonable steps within the discretion of the commission to collect on the judgment. Remember, that's after they've actually had to sue the person, get a judgment in court, take steps to try to collect on it. The guarantee fund really is only viewed as a last stop to try to collect on that money. Additionally, the amount of the guarantee fund, the minimum amount was increased from, or would be increased if this bill passes, from 250,000 to 350,000, and also makes it even clearer and easier for interest earned on the fund to be used for the real estate commissioners and the state of Delaware to be a member of ARELA. That's the Association of Real Estate License Law Officials. With everything happening so quickly, as I mentioned in the beginning, and things nationally changing so quickly, Uh, I encourage, well, I'll say it, I encouraged the Real Estate Commission several months ago to once again become involved with Arello. I think there's some very good commissioners involved with the entire process now with the Real Estate Commission, and they're obviously take their responsibility very seriously. Commissioner LeBlanc has become very involved with Arello and has attended some of their meetings, is bringing information back from the Arella meetings to Delaware for the real estate commissioners here to be able to take a look at and consider whether there are things they should further pursue for Delaware. So I'm very pleased to see that they're doing that. By the way, the principal amount of the real estate guarantee fund is now in excess of $900,000. So there's no no shortage of funds there for the interest to be used for participation in Arello and also other matters, or if they need to make any awards from the guarantee fund. The Real Estate Commission meetings are public meetings, as I'm sure you're aware, and they are still being done hybrid, so in person or online. So it's easy for you to participate going to the Cannon Building in Dover or logging on online. The Real Estate Commission is in the process of reviewing all of the rules and regulations of the commission in order to make certain revisions. And we think after that, they will then take a look as well at some potential statutory changes that would be done through the General Assembly. That would be a bill for next year. So with this being public meetings, DAR has been very involved with us through the Licensing and Practices Committee. And the next commission meeting is this Thursday if you want to log on. And so we're working on that. A big point we've tried to make with the commission is to take a look at the regulations with an eye towards modernizing things to the way business is done in today's real estate brokerage world, and also to not put a regulation in place if they don't have the ability to enforce it, or if they, and the commissioners themselves, I know, are frustrated by the lack of enforcement. We need to have some sympathy with the Division of Professional Regulation. They oversee 40 some professions. There's a limited staff of investigators and hearing officers and deputy attorney generals who work on the various professions matters. And we can understand that if a complaint comes into DPR against some, let's just say, medical type professional that's potentially causing harm or putting members of the public at physical risk, obviously that's going to jump up to the top of the investigation pile, and an investigation about an alleged violation of a real estate advertisement, let's just say, is going to go further towards the bottom of the bill. But in our discussions with the commission about this and encouraging them to try to see what could be done, the Deputy Attorney General, Zach Naylor, who, by the way, I think is doing a really good job. He's been a quick study and giving good advice to the Real Estate Commission. He let the commission know that some of the other professions, through their licensing acts, have a procedure that they can issue a letter of concern. We were thinking, could they do some type of an instant ticket type process? They can't do that, but Mr. Naylor mentioned that they could potentially look at, through a statutory change, allowing the Real Estate Commission to have a similar process of a letter of concern. So, for example, then if a complaint came in alleging a violation of the advertising regulations, they wouldn't have to go through the full investigation process and all of that. They could send out a letter of concern to alert the licensee that this has been brought to the commission's attention, and please take a look at that. And if that advertisement did violate the regulations, to please correct it. And then obviously, if they got further complaints about that same type of advertising, they would move it on to the more formal investigation and complaint and hearing stage and discipline through the commission. So that's been some of our overall, if you will, thoughts as to encouragements for the Real Estate Commission. So they have divided the regulations into different groups. They've divided themselves as the commission, nine commissioners into teams to take a look at them. And DAR is putting forward suggestions and comments as well. I want to pause for just a second and emphasize everything I went over with you about the wholesaling bill and the potential changes to the guarantee fund. That has not been approved at this point. That wholesaling and guarantee bill was introduced on July 1st. It was the senator's strategic call as to when he would introduce that. So he did that actually on July 1st. It's Senate Bill 201 if you want to take a look at it. So it obviously will not be coming to the attention of the General Assembly and their committee hearing process, et cetera, until January of 2026. But so, and also these changes to the regulations have also not been put into place yet. Through our comments with to the commission on the regulations, again, in trying to modernize things, we've asked them to take a look at the education audit process because we don't think that was, choosing my words carefully, I mean, quite as good as it could have been the last time. They did the best they could with the way the rules are and the statute are, but we are encouraging them to put in a procedure where at the end of the license period, consider allowing a broker a little grace period, if you will, that if they find they had a licensee who had wrongfully renewed without actually completing their CE, that the broker could go ahead and suspend that person's practice until they completed the CE. The broker would need to document that suspension and that way have the broker not be in trouble for it. The problem we found through the last audit cycle was there were several cases where the broker had amazing procedures in place for tracking the CE, getting certificates, double checking, triple checking things, and yet still somehow a licensee renewed without really completing the CE, and then the broker ending up getting a fine and a letter of reprimand against the broker, despite that broker's best effort. So we're encouraging them to take a look at some type of process that way. It just seems to be fair for brokers who are pursuing those diligent efforts and can prove that, and yet still somehow somebody renews without actually completing their CE. Another topic, broad topic we've asked the commission to take a look at is what is considered adequate supervision of a brokerage office. As you know, we're long beyond the days when there would be a single brokerage office and a member of the public would come into the office or make an appointment to come into the office. And so I don't need to tell you how the transactions are done these days, but that just single office with the broker sitting there waiting for members of the public to come in. We're way long beyond that. So they are taking a look at the topic of adequate supervision of main offices and branch offices and the broker's responsibilities and the supervisor for that office. We think it involves many different factors, and what the commission has done with this particular topic is they've set up a separate task force that will of commissioners that will continue to meet after the regular part of the commission agenda is done. So don't sign off too quickly and stay in the room if you are there in person, because they'll be then discussing the topic of supervision, because we think it includes many different factors, and it's somewhat that adequate supervision when you see it. Supervision that doesn't measure up to adequate supervision when you see it, because it involves many different factors, such as the number of agents being supervised, the number and location of the offices, their physical proximity, for example, the accessibility of the manager to agents, other brokers, and consumers. Is it one person trying to supervise two or three different offices, or does that person have their own assistants, transaction coordinators, trainers, et cetera? What level of training does the broker and the uh, office manager provide to their licensees? What type of technology do they use for virtual supervision and technology integration to the whole process? That's not to say every broker would have to be the top person in the use of technology. If it's one broker and one office and they're not using much technology, maybe that's adequate supervision. That might be okay. What transaction management systems they use, what risk reduction measures they have in place, what's the transaction volume capacity of the offices. Does the supervisor of the office himself or herself also engage in real estate transaction, or are they focused 100% on the supervision activities? The office hours and the broker's presence. What does the broker or the supervisor do in the way of reviewing marketing activities, reviewing documents, reviewing contracts, reviewing leases? What's the tenure of the broker or the supervisor in the real estate profession, and their level of education and keeping current themselves? So you can see, with there being so many different factors involved in trying to decide what is adequate supervision, it's good that the commission has set up a separate task force on that. Then, all right, let me just try to, you don't need to know absolutely everything that they're looking at, but just some little things like when they apply, making it clear they have to applicant has to provide a copy of their certificate showing they passed the required exam. That's being done now, but it just wasn't in the regulations. We've asked them to take a look at some of the processes when a broker is applying and needing to show what proof they have for an escrow account for holding funds, because there's difficulties these days with banks having a specific definition of what they will call an escrow account or not. And so we just need that to make sure it's modernized in compliance with how the banks are needing to do things these days. And also, we've asked them to take a look at updating some of the processes for when a licensee transfers from one office to another, or one uh, broker to another. Again, taking a look at some of the advertising rules and what types of advertising does it apply to, maybe adding the words digital marketplaces, again, trying to modernize things. And I don't think they'll be doing any wholesale changes. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, having just explained the wholesaling bill. I don't think they'll be doing any extensive revisions to the advertising regulations, so don't get all excited there. And we'd like them to update some of the process for the approval of offices. And some of these things are already doing, for example, showing a proof of an office sign rather than having to have the actual sign. I mean, one brokerage went to the extent of having the sign made, mounting the sign on the building, having pictures taken, then covering up the sign because it wasn't approved yet as an office. So we think it would make sense for them to be able to allow showing a mock-up proof of a sign, your layout of the office, type of furniture you'd have, et cetera. Have the office approved provisionally, pending showing actual implementation of the office and the sign, et cetera. And let's see here. Okay, let me switch to another topic for you, and that deals with the realty transfer tax and what amounts the tax is collected on. I understand there's some difference of interpretation within the state. I'll tell you my interpretation of it, and I'm writing a blurb for DAR to be able to put out shortly on this. And that is that if you take a look at the transfer tax form, it says to put down the amount of the consideration and then to also put down the assessed value of the property for local real estate tax purposes, enter the greater of those lines. It doesn't then say automatically compute the transfer tax based on the greater of those lines. Um, Through what I've looked at within the transfer tax code, the regulations, and also a 2007 letter opinion we have from the AG's office, I'll explain it this way, and that is you start with the rule that you would pay the transfer tax based on the negotiated arm's length price. Then if it turns out the assessed value is higher than that arm's length negotiated price, you'd still base it on the arm's length negotiated price. So the higher assessed value concept, that will still come into play when it's maybe a family transaction that doesn't qualify for some type of an exemption, or two tenants in common who own property together, but then one of them was buying out the other, but not for an arm's length price. They were just looking to get out of the situation. Maybe the party staying on, assuming the full obligation for the mortgage. So it's that type of transaction where the assessed value would come into play to use that as the value for computing the transfer tax. So, as I said, I understand there's some different interpretations of that throughout the state, but we're trying to get that ironed out because I think what I've explained is the correct interpretation of that. I'd like to circle back to just comment on what something Joe alluded to as far as in his reviewing some of the bills. And that is just to say, I think we, the brokerage community, we're going to face a significant policy discussion next year about the limits of state authority, the limits of county and municipality, city authority when it comes to several different topics. We saw it this year with the bill dealing with Sussex County not approving the permit for the cable coming from the wind across Sussex into Maryland. I'm not going to get political on that. It's not an energy discussion or anything. That's just one example. We're going to face it as well with looking at accessory dwelling units. As you know, may know, Newcastle County loosened up their requirements this past year on accessory dwelling units. But then there's still going to be a lingering issue. What about the deed restrictions? Maybe you have deed restrictions that say that the neighborhood is a single family home neighborhood. Well, if you have an accessory dwelling unit being occupied by somebody who's not related to the property owners, then is that still single family? Additionally, renting out that ADU, would that possibly be considered running a business from the property where the old deed restrictions might say that it is to be used for single family residential purposes, not for the conduct of a trade or business. And so we're going to face that issue again as far as the deed restrictions go. And would the state, there had been a bill possibly proposed, Joe might remember better than me, but a year and a half or so ago, that would have overridden deed restrictions that would prohibit those type of accessory dwelling units. Does the state have the authority to do that? We've been dealing with this issue for probably more than a decade now on different topics such as displaying the American flag, solar systems, wind turbines on residential property. Other states looking at it with things like clotheslines and low maintenance gardening. Some people might call weeds, but no, it's somebody's wildflower area of their property. And so we're going to face this on a lot of different topics, building codes that may limit occupancy very strictly, building codes that are not accommodating additional types of structures and things like that. So we're going to face this as a policy issue, and it bears serious discussion. So if you have interest in that, I encourage you to contact DAR, become involved in that discussion, and it's probably something that you could take a good 6, 8 months or so of discussion, and whoever's discussing it, whatever committee's discussing it, probably their first thoughts on it might not be their last thoughts on it. And so I encourage people to give that some further thought. I've been tracking what's being done in some other parts of the country and regionally, for example, Montgomery County in Maryland, and what they've tried to do some there, and also court cases challenging some of it. So that's going to be a topic that we'll need to take a look at. The rent stabilization. I might not get the wording exactly right, but on Bloomberg News, Larry Summers, I guess, had been Treasury Secretary, was also head of Harvard University. Not somebody that I'd call dyed in the wool conservative. I'll just say that he was interviewed and said that he felt that rent control was the second best way to absolutely destroy a city, after number one being bombing it. So we are certainly, as Joe indicated, going to be hot on the topic of watching out for a rent stabilization or rent control. You're probably aware nationally, discussions going on with that in city of New York City, and the election happening there, and the mayoral race coming up. Now, still got a little time here, so let me switch to the one big beautiful bill. And this is much too much for me to comprehend all of it. So isn't it fantastic? There's other huge law firms that have the people to do this. So there's a free summary if you'd like to get it through a law firm, Holland and Knight, fantastic law firm. The one big beautiful bill is close to 1,000 some pages. They've done a wonderful 28-page summary, and so that's you can get it from their website. I'm not involved with them, not an advertiser with them. I'm just saying, isn't it great we have resources such as this available to us? So they've broken it down with different topic areas, reviewing the whole bill. I've gone through their summary. I've not read the bill. I've gone through their summary just to highlight a few things for you, because maybe they're topics that you're involved in Delaware you might look into further. You've probably heard about the individual tax provision, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But some other things that you may not have heard of in housing and community development includes an expansion of the low-income housing tax credit, has preserves municipal bonds tax exempt status, so that's good for us here in Delaware. Has a permanent renewal and enhancement of the opportunity zones. So I realize this is more within the commercial arena perhaps, but if any of you have been involved with opportunity zones in Delaware, then you might take a look at those provisions. So that'd be good news economically for us here in Delaware. Uh, there are several things within the bill that cause me some concern that I think they will lead to increased pressure on the state of Delaware budget, i.e. potentially need for cutting other costs or increasing taxes. And so just be aware of some of those. For example, some of what they're doing in the Medicaid area, of reducing some perhaps of what the federal government's paying for. That might mean that the state of Delaware might be picking up more of that cost. Interesting thing, hadn't heard anything about this one, but Section 5301 about timber sales. requiring the U.S. Forest Service to annually sell at least 250 million board feet greater than the timber sold in the previous fiscal year on forest reserves. So maybe that'll make us less reliant for building on lumber from Canada, et cetera. There are provisions for restocking the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I think that's a good thing. Then you may have heard some of the changes that were made as far as environmental provisions and doing away or reducing some of the matters dealing with certain green energy items. There's a section about enhancing options and funding for certain privatized military housing projects. So if any of you are involved with maybe military housing in Delaware, maybe that's something we could look at. Is there some money that could be available to help out for that in Delaware? Let's see here. Again, another military housing funding process. They want a report, a very aggressive time frame here, a 30-day timeline for military departments to submit plans to the Armed Services Committee for family housing services across the branches of the service. So could be some good opportunity there. Some changes in the SNAP program, again, I think could lead to further pressure on the Delaware budget. Just about out of time here. Interesting for our Delmarva Peninsula, a poultry insurance pilot program, launching a pilot program for contract poultry growers to access insurance policies to protect against extreme weather-related events. So maybe that'll help us here on the Delmarva poultry industry. Grants for animal disease prevention and management, maybe that would help us here in Delaware. So all sorts of things within this one big beautiful bill that you've probably not heard of in the popular media. So you maybe get a hold of some summaries like this, take a look at it, see what may work for you in your brokerage or investment world to help out here in Delaware. Let's promote Delaware, do everything we can for Delaware here. And I will pause at this point. Joe, I
Thank
don't know if
you, Andy.
there's any.
Appreciate all of that. That was very informative as usual. Um, yeah, we've covered a lot this year. In fact, I want to end on a high note of that and just reiterate our appreciation to all of our members, for those who joined us today. Um, and for those who are part of our various different committees, we have some of the most important folks involved, but we're always looking for other volunteers to come and join our committees, our very important forums committee or our public policy committee. We have so many different folks here with different backgrounds, and each and every one of them is essential to that. So if you've never been involved and you've thought, maybe there's a time is now, because housing in Delaware is on the forefront of some major shifts and changes, and we can always use new perspectives and always looking forward to that. So if you haven't used my email before, I just into the chat. Again, I'm Joe Brennan, the Director of Government Affairs. That's my email. For those of you who don't have it, please copy that and use that. Send me an email if you have a question about a particular bill. We didn't cover every single bill, obviously, that passed this year, but if you have specific questions, I'm always open to having discussions, whether it's through email or over the phone. If there's something new we need to take a look at, we'll do that. We'll at least listen to you and hear you out. One of the things I do, yes, thank you, Aaron, for your comments on SB 56. Yes. So there's a couple of things I just want to end on here. As we close out the books on the 153rd General Assembly, one thing is clear, and that's DAR is not just watching what happens in Dover, we're shaping it. And I want to use that as an opportunity to help encourage all of you who are listening, who are part of this, to contact us and get involved. If there's a way, we have not even our committees, we also have task forces that help shape policies that go before our public policy committee and go before legislators. So if you want to help shape policy, if you want to help shape how Delaware deals with housing and you want to help be part of that solution, please contact me. We're always looking for folks to do that. Um, and in this critical time for housing in Delaware, our goal is to continue to try and lead, and that's our endeavor. So once again, we always appreciate your participation in this. We look forward to next year. If there's anything that you need from us, if there's anything you want to contact me on, um, please feel free. We have a pretty lively bunch here in Dover, and we're always looking to connect with new folks. So, with that, we will end today, and we thank everyone for your participation. Have a great rest of your 2025. We look forward to 2026.